So hello, everybody, and you're very welcome to this session organised by the Occupational Health Division of the Health and Safety Authority. Really looking forward to doing the session with you today, and we've all put a good bit of effort into preparing what we present to you so that it's really useful to you going forward. We don't just want to have some theory delivered to you because you can read books. We want you to kind of get insights from what we do so that you can help yourselves in your organisation, whatever your role is. So just to go through what we're going to do, we're recording the event, as I've said. We're running from 10 until 12 noon. We have a Slido going on, so there'll be 5 questions throughout the event. And this is the QR code for the Slido. There's also a link for the Slido, I believe, in the Q&A. So if you want to go down to Q&A, you'll see a link and do it, or you can do it through this. It's just 5 questions, and at the very end, we'll give you the results, and you'll get the results on your phones. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this session here, my presentation with the Slido. I'm really going to talk about the psychology of workplace bullying insofar as we can talk about it, and we don't know everything about it. And then looking at workplace conflict and how it escalates to bullying. And that's really going to be the arc of what I talk about. Also remedies to resolve, naturally enough. Ciara Kerwin, my colleague and inspector and psychologist, is going to present then on the HSA approach to managing bullying for healthier and safer systems of work. And it's basically when the inspector calls. And that's very important too for all of you because inspectors will be calling. Dr. Paolo Iaranon's presentation then professor from the University of Limerick, his research was into workplace conflict, negative behaviour, incivility and uncivil acts and how they can lead to dire consequences, which can end up being bullying, not always, but sometimes can, or bullying complaints. He's going to talk about that, a very interesting presentation. And then my summary, small little wrap up at the end, where I'll have a good few solutions and recommendations. So keeping them to the end to keep you motivated to remain with us. Hopefully you won't need to be motivated from external sources too much. So there will be a comfort break from 11 to 11:05 for anyone who's got planned anything to do with texts or phones or any other things you need to do. There will be that break from 11 to 11:05. So let's get started. I know we have people still coming in, but we do want to keep to the timing, so I'm going to keep going. For yourselves today, it's important before you do anything, and I'm just using psychological principles pretty much for everything I do, much to the annoyance of those around me in my non-work life, but it's really important that you don't just come to this session and it ends up slightly interesting or very interesting, but you don't really remember much from it, and you haven't improved your way of dealing with this issue in your workplace. I appreciate your time, and I just think this will make it easier for you to use things. Think about yourself doing your job these days. Think about you doing your job rather than other people for this session, and always try to relate what I'm talking about to you. We know from psychological research that if we make something personal, it's got much more kind of agency and it's much more relevant to us. Also, as you're doing that, you'll be a little bit aware of the barriers you've got, and you probably already know them, but you hide them to yourself. We're not great at hiding things to ourselves, really. So try to also think of the barriers you've got in your approach. And then reflect on getting answers to the problems that you've identified rather than just the answers that you already know you want. They're probably not the right answers you're seeking. So just try to do that for yourself. You know, I won't know either way when this is over, tomorrow or the next day, whether you've benefited, but I want you to. We know that conflict is everywhere and it cannot be avoided. So those people out there who say already, I avoid conflict, you're not gaining everything you could gain from life or from work, because you're avoiding things that are challenges if you're avoiding all conflict. You know, a well-managed conflict situation can be hugely beneficial and open your eyes to new ways of seeing and doing and hearing. That's not to say that we should go out seeking it, and some of us do go out seeking it and we don't know we do. So increased understanding and insights help us to practice better behaviors, but only if we practice them. So we know from psychological research that you have to practice everything. Knowing is not enough. So awareness raising, education, knowing, it's for some people, actually, it's a solace, because they think then that they're equipped for the issue because they have the master's or the PhD or the diploma or the night course in it, and they know it. It's only through practicing and doing that we know. So we need to keep that in mind. That's just your goal for today. what I want to talk about first is the individual at work. Then I'm going to talk about the workplace, and then I'm going to talk about the broader environment, which is the scene setting for this issue. And then I'll go on to talk a little bit about the psychological principles which help us to understand bullying more, and a little bit about remedies. So the general underpinnings of conflict, and it's conflict, small micro conflicts that lead to bullying. Not always, but what we do is we look at conflicts that don't lead to bullying and conflicts that do lead to bullying allegations, and then we look at what's the difference between the two. So if we look at the individual factors that influence everything we do, which we're not so aware of, these are only some of them. And these could be brought to bear in conversations, for instance, about how we shop, perceptions and biases, labels and assumptions, us versus them, our cognitive style, and our socio-emotional state and self-awareness. Just think about how you shop for food, and all of these things are relevant. All of these things help us, whether we pick a certain type of food, a certain label of food, how many of them we pick, how price aware we are when we shop, and how we engage in the shopping experience. Do we come home and have things that we didn't even plan to buy, or that we don't even know we put into the basket? So we're saying these things influence bullying, and I'll tell you how they influence bullying and conflict. Our perceptions are so full of biases that it's difficult to actually take on board. So when we perceive something that's happening, we're perceiving it with a bias that we all have, whether we like it or not. And one of the examples of it is an attribution bias, which I've outlined there. So when we're driving somewhere, we're busy, we see someone cutting in to us, or breaking a light or taking a wrong turn, we attribute automatically their behavior to a rule breaking negative, because it impacts us badly. Bypasses our consciousness sometimes, but we attribute it in a way that's negative to them. When we do it, we don't attribute it in the same way. We attribute it to some internal need in us, to just this once, or just because I'm in a hurry, or I never normally do it, or nobody's looking. And another thing about perceptions and biases, how we perceive the world really varies depending on who's looking. So we see a car in front of us that's doing something wrong, we might be tend to beep, but if we think that it's someone we know, we'll soon stop beeping. Or we might beep, as I've said before, and then just wave. Yes, I was just saying hello. So our perceptions of what's happening are not reliable. And we make a lot of biases, heuristics we call them in psychology, and we make a lot of errors that way, and we're unaware of them. Or we're vaguely aware of them, but we choose not to attend to them. We also have lots of labels that we use for certain groups and certain behaviors that we grew up with. So you'll notice yourself from your own group that some people, what people regard as rude socially, getting up before the meal is over, clearing a table before someone is finished, what people assume, so our assumptions about what's right and wrong are hugely influenced by our upbringing. Even if we say, if we give out about our upbringings or say something wasn't particularly the right way to do it, we still hold on to them despite ourselves. So they bypass the intellect, and they're there. So we have labels and assumptions about people's behavior that are our own and that are not scientifically reliable or valid. And an example of this would be, or something that highlights this, is how we attend to things. And this, you'll notice the two words here, attention and intention. And if there's one thing you should take from this morning, it's that little nugget, which is when someone says, are you paying attention to that? I was really paying attention. What we're actually paying is intention. So with our attention comes intention. Our own intentions to do something influence how we attend and what we attend to. So how we pay attention to, how we understand and perceive has already got a couple of biases in it and a couple of things that skew it. And that's what is our intention in the situation, because that's going to influence how I pay attention. We also always have in and out group. People like me do this, people not like me do the other. So this is as true for those who are accused of bullying as it is for those who accuse people of bullying. So let's not assume there's two very different groups. There's no yin and yang here, because we're all in the center, really. at work, trying to do our best. No one goes in there really thinking. I mean, very small minority maybe with an agenda go in there thinking, I've got a bullying agenda. And that is not to knock the people out there who are saying these people do exist. They do, but they're in the minority. So us versus others thinking is a huge part of what makes us judge people, label them, assume things about them, categorize them. And we pay attention to them to look and see what they're doing. And we notice, they are doing the thing I thought they were doing. Why do we do that? Expectation effects. You know from research that if you expect something to be a certain way, you're much more likely to find it that way. Now, a few caveats there, it depends on a few other things, because sometimes you'll find if you expect something to be a certain way and it falls short of it a tiny bit, we can be highly critical of it and think it was more negative than in fact it was. But normally, if we expect something to be good, and if we have invested in that expectation, so that would be if we've told other people that it's really good, we're going to rate the thing as better than we would normally rate it if we saw it in another environment. So you tell somebody the restaurant's going to be great, you've been there before, you've arranged for people to go, so you've invested twice in it, you've told people and you've arranged something. You're much more likely to be biased then towards thinking that it is good when other people sitting around you are thinking, this is really not so great. And you're just trying to read their expressions and they're trying to read yours and they're saying, we better pretend it's quite good because she booked it and she liked it. And we all go home thinking that it was great. So we're all in this kind of situation together. But expectation effects have a huge impact as well on the conflict developing situation. Because if you think the person is not with me, they're against me, they're not in my group, I've watched them there and I see what they're doing, and they're doing it because they don't like me or they don't respect me, because that's my bias. I expect that they're going to do something bad to me tomorrow. We're more likely to see what they do as negative to us, whereas really it might be negative to everybody in the office, but we'll see it as targeted to us. A huge thing in the individual at work is their cognitive style. I just put in INTP here to let you to know about Myers-Briggs. It's only one of the many, and it's not a perfect system by any means, but there are people we all have different cognitive styles, our styles of interaction. The INTP references somebody who's an introverted, intuitive thinking perceiver, and the opposite of that would be an extroverted, sensing, feeling judger. So you'd have two people who can be very opposite. Anyone who's been involved before in team dynamics or teamwork or Belbin type team psychology, within any team, there should be different types of people. They all bring different things to it. And when I was working in the past, in the early days of my career in teams, it was amazing the way people would see the benefit of someone who's very different to them by everyone in a team, say of 8 or 9, carrying out this self-assessment and then reporting back what their style is. And each style has got positives and each style has got some negatives. But it was a really good way for everyone to appreciate and respect the benefits of the other people, which is what we all have to do. And we all find differentially difficult. And finally, our socio-emotional state at any time differs from Monday to Friday, from summer to winter, from morning to afternoon. And the socio-emotional state, our mood, as we call it in everyday parlance, really influences conflict. And oftentimes people have said to me, subsequent to indeed a court case on these things, I know that I was very low mood at that time, or I'm always in a low mood on a Wednesday, or something reminds me of something, and I never like working in that building. I just never liked it. It just puts me in bad mood. Something reminded me of something else. So mood, no one's going to say in the middle of a conflict issue in work, actually, I was in very low mood at the time. It was fine, because by then they've got expectation effects. They've told people they're in it. They can't back out. So they have to be very aware of their own emotional, social state. Also, levels of self-awareness are different. And finally, imagination and emotion. And I often link them in with attention and intention, because if we looked at how we attend to things, what we intend to do, how our imagination around things is, are we positively focused? Do we think things can work out well in the environment we're in? And what's our emotional regulation like? And these things really influence the individual at work. And they make it difficult. Listen, they make it difficult in the neighborhood. They make it difficult in the family. They make it difficult in marriages and long-term relationships and short-term relationships. So these are not things that are specific to conflict, but they're specific to the individual. making their way through the world. And these are things we really have to take on board more in the workplace, because we seem to have got this false idea that when we become part of the technical workplace, which really is more and more legalistic, technocratic setup these days, that we lose, and we have to forget about, or we have to put aside, or we have to, shadow off these issues. They're not shadowed off. There is no boundary wall. And if there is, we're not going to do that well. So they're part of it. So the individual at work has to become part of this. Are you recognizing people you work with in what I've just said? I bet you're recognizing some other people, but they're recognizing you too. So the idea is to recognize yourself. So let's look a bit at the social context of work now, because we've got the person, the individual, but we've got work. So this is what we really need to look at. What are the organizational factors that we know from research, and I know from dealing with individuals, help to foster or facilitate conflict? And we cannot get rid of these things, but we have to be aware of them. And if we have one of them or two of them at work or heightened at any one time, we can probably manage it. But if a good few of these are coming together, you're going to have a hotbed of conflict facilitating scenarios. People really, it's not just that they need clear goals themselves, but they can't have a goal that conflicts with another goal. So if my real goal is to be seen to be really good at something, and another conflicting goal is to actually get all the detail done, I'm probably going to try and get my own goal done first, but I'll have to pretend to get the other goal done as well. So you really need to have clear goals for work, not ambiguous, but with a little bit of leeway for the person around what they like to do. A huge thing that I see are competing resources for approval in workplaces. So if someone feels that they have to be approved of against another person, and for them to be approved of, the other person has to not be approved of, then you're more likely to see a situation where a conflict will occur that may well develop. Instead of saying you can be approved of and you can also be approved of. It's not a competition. So it's not a classroom, and there is too much competing kind of dynamic set up maybe in our culture. But really it mitigates against one person for the other person to do well. Again, sometimes just a gap, like a lack of any feedback or metric on performance, can be something that will help to foster an environment where conflict and bullying might occur. I don't need to read out these, but they're all very valid. But one of them that I think that's come to the fore of late, and you can see it there highlighted, is this piece of the lack of opportunity for face-to-face social interaction that's not work-related. And we know from research done during the pandemic that we did not realize how important it is to have those face-to-face contacts at the time when things are a little bit tough for us. When things are going well, possibly not needed so much. But when there's a little bit of things going a little bit wrong, it's so important to have social interaction, because you get so many cues from other people's faces, from other people's body language, from having a coffee or having a water or walking around and seeing and just being with other people and hearing the voices and the phone voices and whatever. It actually is a mediator of a stress reaction, because we're social beings. And we don't, even if you're out there saying, I don't really agree with that for me, I would have to say, I kind of do agree with it for you, because we do need it. And what happened to people often during the pandemic who were introverts, who thought they didn't need it, they found themselves deteriorating, because not only did they need it, they weren't the type of people who were used to making the efforts to go for the walk or make attachments with people, and they got left behind sometimes. So these are the huge organizational factors that are really important. Let's look at the broader context, the different industry requirements, and they're often not part of the recruitment process. So one type of industry will recruit one type of person. I remember a story recently, somebody told me, or not so recently, a couple of years ago, about the industry they were in. They recruited only grade first class honor graduates. And they had a lot of difficulty dealing with conflict in different teams. And discussing it and looking at it, I thought, why are you only taking people with firsts? Oh, that's the industry standard now because we can get them. I thought, you should really be taking people with 2 1s and 2 2s, and even somebody with a pass. because you need to mix it up and you need people with different skills. And let's face it, there are very skilled, good working people who don't get first. So, and they actually listened to me and they changed it because they were finding too much conflict with the same type of people. So different industry requirements are often not part of the recruitment process. Working from home, obviously a huge challenge in a workplace culture. Different types of work, digital and platform work, vulnerable workers, workers from different cultures, workers who have had difficult backgrounds. Then there's sensitive content work. We have our recently published sensitive content guide for those people who work with difficult content. And they're not just people who are working in the kind of environment of the internet. They're also people who work with difficult materials, whether they're guards or DPP's office, or people looking at files to do with difficulties in people's lives. And the other broader context we have is law, health and safety legislation being why we're here, but there's other employment legislation, other employment organizations, the Human Rights and Equality Organizations, WRC, there's civil law and people taking civil cases for employment-related, workplace-related things. And then there's the social norms and expectations that are changing all the time. So this is the broader context within which we're working. Our health and safety legislation is very technical, and it is really a criminal legislation piece where you look at what the employer's rights and duties are, what the employee's rights and duties are. And we look at, and my colleague inspectors go out and inspect and look for where a duty has not been met. This area of work fits in there because we have our Section 8 to be there. The employer has a legal responsibility to ensure that things are managed properly and that improper conduct doesn't occur. But it's a very, very nuanced area, and the legislative approach is not one that's that suited to it. So what we want to do is, before we reach the legislative approach, to deal with it in a way that is getting in there before it, to help people to deal with it. Because really, when it comes to that stage, it's difficult for everybody. And it's not the right approach, really. What we want to do is look at how we can change things before it gets to that stage. So let's look at the bigger environment and how it influences us. Look at an example. I gave you an example earlier of a restaurant. So we know from research into psychology and consumer behavior that when you expect something to be very good, it's usually better. But also in a restaurant, when people say, that's a great place, I love it, they're usually remembering something about it that made them feel good. And it's usually not just the food. Even for foodies, they might say it's the food, but usually it's something to do with that famous word, the ambiance. And the ambiance is made up of the environment and how it looks, how it feels. So the noise levels, the chatter levels, the ability to be heard by people we go, the table, the positioning, and the service. So all of those things around it often bypass our status-driven attention, but really they matter. Look at how the environment influences us driving. When we see signs for slow down, we already know we should slow down because we can see it right in front of us. So it's not that we don't know, but what it does is it cues us. It cues us that other people are looking or might be looking, because this is a social message to us: speed limit, tiredness kills. So signage just reminds us of things. So we need to be reminded. When we look at shopping, we know quite well that in shopping, we buy things sometimes just on spec or because they're there or because we see them. So the environment influences how we purchase. If we look at smoking, everybody knows that smoking is bad. Do we need a reminder that smoking's not good? But we still, well, I don't, but people still smoke. And they smoke because they find it hard to deal with the cravings of smoking. They associate it with other things. So if we look at all of these things, we look at how we associate certain things with other things. We look at how we make decisions that we hadn't planned to make. We look at how that we need to be reminded of rules even though we know them. And we look at how we often judge things as good, but we're really judging other parts of it as good. So what does it say? We're not that in charge of ourselves all the time, and we're not that conscious. So the environment can cue us for pro-social behavior, i.e. rule-abiding, keeping to what we planned to do and doing it, or environment can cue us to antisocial behavior equally. So we need to be really aware of other environments and how it influences us. So we need to understand these, because sometimes I find in workplaces, actually negative behaviors are reinforced without anybody knowing it. And one way of reinforcing negative behaviors is just to ignore them when they happen and make no comment about them being inappropriate. Because the person, and it could be any of us, interprets that as, that's okay. So what we really need to do is extinguish antisocial behavior. And this is not Big Brother. Nobody can cough out a turn or do anything out of turn. This is not what we're talking about. This is when people are behaving in ways that are generally accepted as part of the incivility suite of behaviours. And Paolo will talk more to that. Small conflicts, even though they don't arise normally, and they're not part of the suite of behaviours that are often brought to the employer or complained of, but they cause stress because people don't like to feel they're in small conflict. And what happens when people are involved in small microaggressions and small conflicts is they start to confuse the cues they're getting from others because they're confused. So they're not sure how to interpret. And our usual habitual way of interpreting, attributing, and often what we do in our attributions, they're frozen, which is a phrase from Lewin, which means they're kind of set. And the older we get, the more set they get. And we sometimes need to unfreeze them. But what happens when we're getting small micro conflicts is those cues are confused and our perceptions are altered. We also, when we're in small stresses, our perception of time alters and we do more rushing to catch up. So we feel we have to rush more. It's one of the reactions and one of the negative secondary reactions to stress. We then take shortcuts in how we operate because we don't have the same mental resources. We also make errors, again, research backs us up in how we plan and think. So our executive function is impaired when we're stressed. That makes us make more mistakes, and that stresses us because we don't want to be making mistakes. So it means we have to cover our mistakes and we have to give out to ourselves for making the mistakes. So all of it is a difficult scenario, even for small conflicts. And what we also happens is with stress is our socio-emotional consciousness is reduced. We're less sensitive to others. We give them the benefit of the doubt less, and we're less indulgent of others or to take on their perspective. We also have a reduction in our own capacity to enjoy things. So we're very, very reduced when we're in conflict. And when we have ongoing stress, we have it's such a bigger issue that it really impairs our ability to be. And we would call this, and certainly in the clinical literature, they call this 6 weeks or more. So 6 weeks or more of that feeling of being distressed can be dealing with a small conflict that's slowly escalating. Biologically we change, physiologically we change, and then we have a feedback loop that's telling ourselves, I don't feel good. My shoulder is sore, my back is sore, my digestive problems, I have headaches, can't really sleep. I don't feel good, I feel stressed. And the secondary effects are going to be added to it, which are, I'm going to be avoiding people. I'm going to be thinking all the time, what's going on? The context I'm in will influence me in terms of if it's going to be supportive of me or antagonistic. If it's going to be, oh, and work is making it worse. Work is this, that, and the other that are negative things. So the context really can influence it getting worse or make it better. And really the context is all of us because that's the work environment. What are the pivot points for this escalation? And one of the pivot points is working from home because it can be very positive. There can be very good things about working from home, granted. But as I mentioned earlier, the social piece is missing when you're working from home, if you're working from home all the time or the vast majority of the time, because you do not have that ability to just meet someone, have something positive said and let it go. And also when we're working from home, it's easier to escalate things by using the email because it feels like it's freedom from consequences. So a pivot point from escalation is no face-to-face context. Also, a pivot point is if nothing is done. I've seen this in my own career to date where people have said, I'm going to take it further because nothing was done. So usually it's between 2 and 4 months. If nothing gets done, the stress gets more chronic, sleep gets affected, other things happen, and then it's going to go forward. Often as well, the person orchestrates their own social self-exclusion. So it's a secondary effect of feeling stressed, but then the isolation and no one to talk to can trigger escalating behavior. Obviously increasing anger. If there's a lack, if there's a vacuum, the person is then changed. They move their uncertainty and hurt to anger, and anger reduces our abilities to decision make, to seek help. What we do then is just the quick fix to anger is seek retribution and make bad judgments. And a real big problem is overthinking, rumination. And rumination, unfortunately, cognitively, neuroscience shows us that when a person is overthinking about a problem, if they're just thinking about the problem, they're actually reworking the synaptic system whereby the problem is replayed to the person. So when you replay a problem to yourself, the problem gets worse because you see the problem as bigger than it really is in the context of the other things around that problem. So a person will judge the problem as 80% causing them stress if they keep thinking about it. If they think about it less, they'll call it 50%. So we need to retrain ourselves. It's not about overthinking it. It's about moving to take action. Rumination also leads to people being awake at night. And awake at night is a bad thing. It's a huge factor in all mental illness and mental malaise generally. And it leads to incivility and chaotic escalation of bullying complaints. So recommendations and solutions. I've given you a whistle-stop tour there of some of the causal factors. I really need to say to you, it's not just bullying that this leads to, it's conflict generally. The remedies are threefold, and I'm going to talk at the very end of this session at 20 to 12. I'm going to give a little session of more bullet point remedies, but really the remedies are about the process itself. Do you have a process to deal with this issue, which is trusted? And it will be trusted if it's fair and if it's transparent. That's if you take a person through it. Now, what's in the content? Is the content appropriate? And is the person offered options? That's what's in your anti-bullying policy and how it's applied. And the third piece is, what is the interpersonal relationship like while bringing a person through this? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But it's not the same as having a scaffold to break, it's broken and you fix it. It's not the same as having a twisted ankle, you put something on it and you rest it up. It is about three things. It's about the human being and their perception. It's about the other party and their perceptions and employment law around that. And it's about the workplace, which is quite technical and profit oriented. And then getting it to a solution. So do you have an anti-bullying policy? Is it robust and trusted? Are there options within it for a person to not lose face? And who is leading it? And in the who is leading it piece, we really need to look at accommodation and assimilation, some of the psychological principles of human development. You need to make it more accommodating than you would make another thing, because the person does already feel discommoded. So you need to front load more accommodating things for the person. You need to reduce their need to adapt to the organization or the system, because effort, reward, and balance is a big part of stress. So the person has to make less effort towards this remedy and get more reward early on. You need to, for instance, allocate times of meeting regularly, scheduled, keep them, stick to them. But you're trying to reduce uncertainty for the person. You're trying to be very clear and you're trying to be very soothing. So you're trying to frame it and nudge it and prime it towards the positive. And that includes towards different outcomes that they can choose from to reduce their uncertainty and their feeling of having not been given something that they should have been given, because they should have been given the respect that they feel they were not given. And this is immaterial about whether there's a finding in their favor or not. What does research tell us? It tells us that highly disturbing, socially and emotionally challenging things that come in our way, they disrespect and undermine us, they bypass our established, purposeful actions in the world, and we behave differently. So it changes us. So we're not the rational people we are before when we're undergoing this. And what we do in organizations is we apply rational systems. They're not easily managed by a legalistic, technocratic, and latterly remote workplace. We need to adapt that to suit this particular issue. And also the ability of the people, whether it's health and safety, HR, our supervisors and managers, to develop the system has to be cognizant of the three main remedies, which is trust, have the good system, and use it carefully. And that can result in slow motion harmony being restored. This I have seen.
So thanks, Patricia. So I'm going to take you through workplace bullying and looking at it from the HSA perspective and just what we found on inspections. So I'm an inspector with the Health and Safety Authority. I look at workplace bullying along with Patricia, and it's a nationwide remit because workplace bullying isn't just in one type of workplace, or it isn't just in one county. It can be found everywhere, and particularly in workplaces and the way we work and the styles we work in, it's not just selective to one particular style. So I have a psychology background as well as an organizational health and safety background. So I have a dual background that allows me to look at it both from psychological perspective and the working health and safety perspective as well. So today's presentation, we look at workplace bullying. I'm going to introduce the code of practice to you, and my findings from inspections and what we've kind of gained through our research and our work and what we found, and hopefully give you some useful information at the end of it. So the definition and the code of practice, why it's so important, it is and has given us a definition of workplace bullying, something that we can hang our hat on. And workplace bullying is repeated inappropriate behaviour, and the repeated nature of it is what's important, because when we're looking for the threshold of what constitutes of workplace bullying, we're leaning into this and seeing does it meet the criteria and reach all the caveats of the definition, that it's direct or indirect. And it can be conducted by groups of people or individual people. And the place of work or course of employment, again, it's so important because we work in different ways. We don't all sit in an office. We could be out working on sites or on the side of the road. We could be working in various locations and various types of work. And that can be reasonably regarded as undermining the individual's dignity at work. What it isn't is an isolated incident. And what I mean by that is a one-off incident doesn't meet the threshold for bullying. It may be inappropriate and may need to be actioned accordingly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is workplace bullying. So what it is not is, it's not harassment. Harassment and bullying are both legally distinct concepts. If it's workplace bullying, it won't be harassment. And if it's harassment, it will not be workplace bullying. And often at times we interchange these words and merge them, but they are very legally distinct concepts, and just to be aware of that. And it's not the normal ordinary performance management, or like Patricia mentioned, conflict. It is massive, and when conflict happens and when it leads into something else, the normal nuances of work and the normal disagreements, myself and Patricia may have a disagreement over a piece of research. It doesn't mean we're bullying one another. We're just having a discussion and a disagreement. And we are allowed and should be allowed in our workplaces to express differences of opinion. It doesn't mean that we're bullying. So it's just to be aware of the kind of the ins and outs of what is and what isn't. And that can be hard sometimes to kind of put your finger on what constitutes workplace bullying and what doesn't, because it is a difficult topic, but it is a topic worthwhile that we need to talk about, because it does happen and it is happening in Ireland. And research in 2020 estimated that it cost the economy per year 239 million, and this was encompassing days lost, health, costs of the business and downturn, and cost of replacing staff. And this research also found that it was more prevalent in the public sector in comparison to the private sector, which was an interesting find. And Paul will be speaking more to his research later on and what he has found. But another piece of research in 2018 in a Denmark study, that people who experience workplace bullying are 1.6 times more likely to experience cardiac health issues. And I think we're only at the cusp of really delving into workplace bullying, and research exists and it's being built on year, and we're all logged on because we all have an interest in it, and it is happening. And it would be remiss to say that it doesn't happen in Ireland. It does. A simple media search would prompt what's been happening, and that it goes beyond what's dealt with in the workplace environment. And if it hasn't been dealt with accordingly, it will go to different courts or potentially the WRC, and it will be out there in the public domain, which no company wants. Every company wants to have a good reputation and good working reputation. And the idea is, if you can address it properly in-house, it should be resolved and hopefully return to the status quo, or a good harmonious working environment. I'm going to briefly touch on the code of practice. The code of practice is available through our site, but also search engine site will bring you to the code of practice, and I might get Sean to put up a link directly to the code of practice as well. So the code of practice, why it's so important, it has given us that working definition. It also provides guidance for anyone who works, employers, employees and representatives. And it gives us guidelines of practice and procedures. And the aim of the code of practice is to try and aim for that solution focus, that we can return to either the harmonious working environment or the status quo in a good, positive manner, and hopefully in a good, positive workplace culture. It is not statute, but it is used and it is referred to. So it is a really important document, and it's one that just to be aware of. I don't expect anyone to read it cover to cover, but if you are in difficulty, or if you are even the person who has to action or deal with workplace bullying, do know where it is and do know where to lean into it too. And it's important because we are all hurt by injustices and we all want to be treated fairly in the workplace. It matters how we're treated and it matters how we feel at work. And when there is workplace bullying, it can have detrimental effects, particularly on obviously the person who is experiencing it, or potentially the person who's being accused of workplace bullying. They may not be aware that they have caused someone distress, that we all individuals and how we act. We may not be mindful of the other person in the equation, just over our own social awareness may be lacking or may be low. But it also has knock-on effects to those who are sitting external of this, but watching it happen and watching how it's managed or mismanaged or how it's being treated. It can have ripple effects and it can lead to disharmonious working environments. So HSA inspections, I often get a few queries or raised eyebrows when I say I'm going out to some workplace bullying inspections. And how does that work? Do I sit and watch you for hours on end on how you interact with your colleagues? No. What I do is I go out and chat to people, talk to the employer, could be managers, could be staff, and look at what's in place to support the employee and the process involved around that. There are times where I go out on foot of complaints, or Patricia may go out on foot of complaints, and we come at it from a different angle and see what was being done to support the employee in the process. And we look at the kind of the process in place or the policies in place. So operational findings, and this is combined from myself and Patricia, and be it complaints or inspections. And what we're finding is people are either confused that are they being bullied in the workplace, or when you're in it, it's very hard to define what's happening to you sometimes, because you can't, it's very hard to kind of put your finger on it sometimes, particularly if there's gaslighting involved or you're second guessing yourself whether it is bullying or not bullying. And then there's potentially a lack of trust in the process, that people don't want to make a complaint for fear of further retribution, or they don't want to be viewed negatively that they're making a complaint or that they can't handle it themselves. And there's just that kind of gap in action. And what I will say, if we are sitting in something that's happening and we don't action it, it's not going to change. And the employer has to be allowed an opportunity to action this before it goes beyond the realm of what can be dealt with in the workplace. Other things that I've noticed is if there's policy, sometimes there's no policy in place that captures workplace bullying, or if there's a policy in place, it's not updated in line with the most recent code of practice. And it's really important to be in line with that, because while it's not statute, the code is used and referred to in other proceedings external of the workplace. There is often at times a cherry pick of stages or missing steps. So it moves from a very low level informal to a formal process. And often at times the steps are merged or skipped or cherry picked. And that's not really suitable, because the idea of the code is that it addresses things from a low level up to a high level. And it's all case dependent, but it allows for action at a low level that may be more suitable there, rather than a whole formal process investigation, when it could have simply been, I made inappropriate comments to Patricia. It may not warrant a full stage formal investigation, but what it could warrant is myself and Patricia having a discussion and flagging that my inappropriate comments caused distress. There's often at times a merging of concepts, and I mentioned this before, between bullying and harassment. They are very legal, distinct concepts, and they shouldn't be merged. They're dealt with in very different ways. And if it's workplace bullying, that means it's not harassment. And if it's harassment, it's not workplace bullying. So it's just important knowledge around that. And often at times I do see in most policies, or in some policies, they put both definitions in, just so you know that if it's this, it's not that, and just be clear in how you are articulating what's happening to you. There's often confusion around the contact person role. Not every company can put in a contact person role owing to potential staff numbers. The contact person role, it's a lovely role if you can put it in, and there's more information on the contact person role within the code of practice, but it also gives very clear role definitions that the contact person role isn't someone who investigates the rights and wrongs or looks at the process of bullying in the workplace. They're merely there as a signpost or someone who can guide the person to where they can find more information or more support. Another thing, and this is something that, you know, I don't want to see if I'm out on inspections, that if it's a generic policy and it's a policy that looks as if it's being cut, copied and pasted from potentially another organization or another business that doesn't fit that site of work where it's happening now, that it doesn't encompass what's happening, which leads to confusion or employees not knowing where to act, or it's like a page of really no information. It's there as a tick box exercise. Oh, we have a policy, but it's a page long, which doesn't really give you much guidance or what's going to happen or information on what the steps are of the process to looking at workplace bullying. And why policies are so important, it does give that guidance, but it gives guidance to everyone, from the employee to the manager who's enacting the policy and the employer, that they have this set of process or guidelines clearly outlined, that it's a stepped process, that there's no ambiguity, and it allows for everyone to be treated fairly and equally, irregardless of if it's the person who is in difficulty and being bullied or if the person that is being accused of being bullying, because the employer has a duty to all their employees, irregardless of where they sit on the side of the fence. Because it may be a case that someone may be accused of bullying and they're not actually bullying, or it's a malicious complaint. Like, these things do happen, and the idea of the policy is that it allows for fairness and for the process to unfold in a fair manner, regardless of what sides you fit on, because there is a duty of care to all. And it should clearly identify who to contact or what the stages and steps are. That, for me as an employee, I can pick up my policy, know where to go to, who to contact, and be under no illusion as to what the process as it unfolds, that it's been clearly laid out in the process, that I'm not going to be hit with something that I didn't know was going to happen. It also gives guidance to the manager, that they know where and what they're to do within the policy, that it provides them with basic safety and safety in the workplace, that they are safe in the knowledge that they're acting to their policy. And for the employer, that the policy that's in place is site-specific and workable and in line with the code of practice. Because there is potential for a complaint to land with the HSA around bullying, we will go in and we will look at what steps were taken. Were they in line with the policy? Is the policy in line with the code of practice? Are they reflective of one another? And the fairness of the process as well. For employer advice, again, put in a policy. If you don't have a policy, go to the code of practice, have a look at the steps and stages that are involved, and interpret those that are going to be workable in your area and that specific site of work. Stick to the steps of the policy, ensure that they're clearly laid out, that everyone knows how they're to work or how they're to act within this policy, and that it is relevant to the place of work, that there should be no ambiguity, that anyone can pick up that policy and know who to contact, where to go to, and the process is laid out in front of them. Also, there is no point in having an amazing policy or a brilliant policy with everything in it if you've told no one about it. So be aware of employee communication or manager communication, and also be cognizant of the fact that not all employees sit at a desk, or not all employees may have computer access if you're putting the policy online. So think about your entire workforce. Has everyone got access to the policies that they need access to? And sometimes that may be going back to a hard copy policy. If you think of the various ways we work in Ireland, there are some people who work out in active roles that may not be back in the office, or maybe not be sitting in an office or with computer access. For management advice, again, know your role, stick to your role. And as Patricia spoke to earlier, we are individuals, we are not simple creatures. We come with many different nuances and characteristics. You could potentially be dealing with massive emotion from both parties or both groups, that nobody wants to be called a bully or be accused of bullying, and that's going to elicit responses, as well as the person who has been dealing with the ongoing bullying issues, because it is repeated in nature. So they've had to go through this process or be sitting in it for however long before they've actioned it to you, and you could be the first person that they could come to, and emotions could be quite high. And again, be clear in your communication, be clear and reflect the policy, and mind and be aware of how you respond. How you respond matters, and it has massive implications as well. And just to be aware of that and be aware of your own emotions in the process as well. As an employee, I'm an employee, there is responsibilities on me that I don't engage in proper behaviour. I shouldn't be going out of my way to cause Sean or Patricia distress, and I really have to be responsible for my behaviours in work. When we sign or join an organisation or join a workforce, we're usually giving a suite of policies that we agree to abide by when we come into the workplace, and that we should comply with them as best we can and cooperate with your employer if there is any policies enacted or allegations of bullying in the workplace. So just remember how you're responding, because when we're working together, and now there is a tendency that we're back in the office a little bit more rather than working from home, and there's still a blended workforce. If people are reaching out and asking for your advice or flagging that they're having issues or of a workplace bullying concern, mind how you're responding. Are you responding as a manager, contact person, or colleague? Just be mindful in that response, because that can have implications or issues. And if you're a manager, be mindful of your response is in line with your policies and procedures. And again, there are two sides to every story, and just be mindful again of that, that we're not just, it may not be as simple as the outlay of someone alleging an offence against someone else. There could be dual things going on there, so just to be aware. So there are supports available. If you go onto our site, the HSA site, and if you when you're looking at the landing page, you can see topics in the top corner. When you click the topics tab, you will be hit with a load of other tabs just down below, and you can see bullying in the workplace. Click on this, and this will bring you to a full suite of different types of links, looking at it from the employer's perspective to the employee perspective. And there's things in there in the FAQs. Am I being bullied at work? Because sometimes we don't know it's happening to us, and we may not have the wording to put around it until we kind of sit with it and disentangle what's happening. It also will give you links to the code of practice, and that will be in when you click into that tab. Additionally, if you go onto the HSA Learning site, and when you go onto this, you can create a free profile. It's all free, and you can select Managing Bullying Complaints at Work for Managers. And this is really good course to do. It's 30 minutes long. It's designed to be user-friendly, and it's to identify if the complaint is a bullying complaint or it may not be a bullying complaint, but it works through that. And it also highlights the manner of how you respond, that's really important about how you respond as well. And it's a great course, quick, simple to log into, and there's loads of access information on our site as well. So just to be aware of where you can tip into for supports.
All right, so hello there. My name is Dr. Paolo Yarnon, and I am a lecturer at the Chemie Business School at the University of Limerick. My primary research interest is workplace mistreatment, specifically workplace incivility and counterproductive work behaviors. So I am keen on understanding how these negative employee behaviors impact workers' well-being and organizational outcomes. So before working as a lecturer, I was a healthcare assistant for 16 years, and I completed my master's in work in organizational psychology and my PhD studies at this same institution. Okay, so way back about 10 years ago, I worked alongside a nurse who always seemed grumpy and approachable, and she believed that her behavior did not affect patient care, but in reality, it had a significant impact. And her colleagues were hesitant to work with her, and the service users felt at that time that they couldn't trust her enough to confide in her. And despite my attempts to understand why she behaved that way and explain the negative impact of her behavior, she remained in denial and shifted the blame onto others. And she refused to acknowledge her own problems, and this made it even harder and difficult for her colleagues to work with her. Now, I was happy, and everyone was happy when she was eventually transferred to another ward, and the atmosphere at work became much more positive. Now, as employees, we see similar kinds of episodes like this at work, and this is an example of workplace mistreatment. And this scenario gives us provides insights into how mistreatment at work can significantly impact the well-being of employees. Harsh treatment undermines respect, it implies rudeness, and negatively impacts employees' cognitive processes and work behaviors. But what is workplace mistreatment? Now, according to Cortina and Magli, some of the top researchers in this area, workplace mistreatment is a form of antisocial behavior within an organization. So it involves instances where a person takes negative actions that go against the norms or terminates positive actions towards another member. Now, this is a very technical definition of the construct, as you can see on the slide, but mistreatment can be broadly defined as negative interpersonal behaviors directed at another person in the workplace. But what I like about this definition is that it mentions a variety of organizational deviance. So this means that mistreatment in the workplace encompasses various deviant behaviors that differ in severity and intent. But what do they mean by a variety of deviant behaviors, and how do they vary according to severity and intent? So I will use this figure from Anderson and Pearson's seminal paper on incivility to illustrate the types of workplace mistreatment and how they differ, how they vary from one another. So antisocial behavior or antisocial employee behavior harms the organization and its stakeholders. So this definition includes the other conceptualizations of mistreatment in organizations. So deviant behavior is a type of antisocial behavior that violates workplace norms. So it includes bullying, as Kira mentioned earlier, harassment, aggression, and incivility. So if we examine aggression here in this slide, it encompasses violence as well as various forms of incivility. So for example, there are instances in which the intention to cause harm is unclear, as perceived by the instigator, target, and observers. But there are other forms of incivility, such as those without intent to harm, but with ambiguous intent that occur out of ignorance or oversight. They fall, and this type of incivility, they fall outside the realm of aggression. So for the remainder of this session, I will focus on workplace incivility. So in their seminal paper, Anderson and Pearson defined workplace incivility as mild discourteous behaviors in which the desire to harm another person is unclear. Now, incivility differs from other constructs of workplace mistreatment because of its distinguishing features of unclear intent and low intensity, and anyone in the workplace can be incivil, okay? So the intention to harm through the eyes of the perpetrator and the target is unclear. In addition to that, in addition to unclear or ambiguous intent, incivility can originate from individuals across all workplaces and occupations. So unlike other forms of mistreatment like bullying, harassment, and aggression, where the perpetrators are usually with someone with power or authority, any member of the organization, regardless of status, such as employee or manager, and people outside of the organization, like customers, service users, can initiate an uncivil act. Furthermore, these features imply that incivility does not always involve direct physical or verbal threats to others. Now, I suppose we have all experienced incivility in our work lives. So uncivil behaviors at work can take many forms. So some examples include being ignored by colleagues when passing by each other, delayed response to emails, making sarcastic comments about someone's abilities, being excluded from professional conversations or events, being spoken into to a condescending manner, and being publicly humiliated or shamed. So these are only a few examples of uncivil behaviors at work. And since the publication of their seminal paper, numerous studies have been conducted across various sectors, including education, retail, healthcare, and hospitality. And we just conducted a study there in the Army as well. There are research done in universities and college. Again, numerous studies have been conducted in various work sectors related to incivility. Indeed, there is an extensive evidence that workplace incivility, although they're characteristically mild, can have a host of adverse effects on employee well-being. So, for example, Gumetti et al. In 2013, they found that constant exposure to uncivil episodes, it leads to lower levels of energy at work. Bunk and Magley in 2013, they found that incivility can reduce one's optimism. Sakurai and Jex, along with our research, which I will feature later, we found that experiencing incivility can lead to heightened negative emotions. Eventually, uncivil behaviors can lead to workplace stress and burnout, as mentioned by Oyeleye et al. In 2013 and Slider et al. In 2010. And more interestingly, the effects of incivility can spill, the effects of incivility at work can spill over at home. Now, episodes of incivility at work can influence employees' performance as well. So Zhang and colleagues found that incivility towards new nurses was relatively common in the workplace, and they demonstrated that incivility impairs job performance by weakening the work ability of new nurses. And according to a recent study conducted by Mahmoud et al., psychological well-being plays a mediating role in the correlation between workplace mistreatment and job performance. So the study found that workplace mistreatment has an adverse effect on psychological well-being, which ultimately leads to poor job performance. And likewise, Ree and colleagues showed that the link between incivility and job performance through emotional exhaustion. So they found that experiences of incivility can lead to increased emotional exhaustion, which then impacts job performance. Now, one can argue that if incivility negatively influences employee well-being and performance, it can also impact the entire organization, and it does. And research has supported this point of view. Welburn and Sariol showed a relationship between experienced incivility and engagement in counterproductive work behavior. So more specifically, they found that experienced incivility predicted the frequency with which employees engage in production deviance and psychological withdrawal behaviors. Now, Welburn and Sariol here demonstrated that incivility not only harms the well-being of employees or the targets, but also leads to more harmful behaviors for organizations. Similarly, Viotti and colleagues found a reciprocal relationship between incivility and reduced organizational inefficiency. And recently, according to a Dyer study by Niven et al., incivility has a daily impact on employees' exhaustion and turnover intention. And this impact is mediated by employees' feelings of sadness and anger. And they showed here that the crucial role of emotions that they link work events like experiencing incivility at work and behavioral outcomes or work outcomes. Now, uncivil acts are, by their definition, mild behaviors, but how come they impact a person so much? Okay, why do research show these adverse negative impact on employee well-being, performance, and organizational outcomes? Why? So its ambiguous or vague nature leads people to ruminate about the intention of the uncivil act. So in other words, people often struggle to understand the intention behind uncivil acts because they are often ambiguous or vague. And Patricia mentioned rumination earlier. Now, this was demonstrated in a study back in 2019. Dembski and colleagues found a link between experienced incivility from coworkers and supervisors and increased insomnia symptoms via increased negative work rumination. So they highlighted that workplace incivility is a major stressor that can lead to prolonged or repetitive thinking about work-related events outside of working hours. The negative work rumination occurs when an individual is unable to let go of work-related events even after the workday is over, which, as a result, can significantly impair their ability to sleep soundly at night. And participants are probably wondering, was the uncivil act, or was the behavior intentional? Why did I deserve such treatment? So these repetitive play of the events in the work can actually lead to various negative outcomes even outside of work. Now, as mentioned earlier, the intention to harm through the eyes of the perpetrator and the target is unclear or vague. Now, put differently, instigators of incivility can easily deny any intent, if it exists, to harm, using ignorance as an excuse and say, I didn't mean to be rude, or say, I wasn't aware that I was being rude, or even blame the target for being oversensitive or for their misinterpretation. Now, in other words, the intention to harm is not straightforward and contingent on the receiver's interpretation. Therefore, incivility can serve as a hidden manifestation of inappropriate behavior, such as discrimination or harassment, which can have serious consequences in the workplace. The perpetrators may avoid now, unfortunately, being punished or reprimanded for their behaviors while increasing the likelihood of such behavior continuing. And this is another reason, or one of the many reasons as to why incivility is so pervasive in the workplace. Now, again, as mentioned earlier, uncivil behaviors can come from anyone within or outside the organization, regardless of their status. Although the extant literature on workplace incivility reveals that employees may encounter incivility from various people in their line of work, the differential impact of incivility on well-being from these different sources has yet to be explored in detail. And this is because most studies of incivility have focused on one source, mainly organizational insiders. So when we talk about organizational insiders, we're referring to colleagues like coworkers, supervisors, and so on. Therefore, our understanding of the impact of incivility from coworkers on employee well-being is more profound than that of organizational outsiders. Notably, it is unclear whether receiving incivility from insiders or outsiders has a different impact on employee well-being. And to fill the gap in the literature, I investigated the differential effects of insider and outsider sources of workplace mistreatment, like incivility, on employee well-being. I also examined the potential buffering effects of personal resources, such as self-efficacy and resilience. So for my PhD, I conducted 2 studies. So the first study was conducted in the healthcare setting. We had 145 participants, Irish healthcare workers. We distributed 3 surveys separated by 1-week intervals. So trait resilience and self-efficacy were measured at time 1. Mistreatment from insider and outsider sources were assessed at time 2. And effective ill-being, which is the outcome variable, was evaluated at time 3. Now, as for the findings, between the 2 sources of mistreatment, only insider sources predicted effective ill-being. We didn't find any significant relationship between outsider sources and effective ill-being. We also found a significant interaction between self-efficacy and insider mistreatment in predicting effective ill-being, but in an unexpected outcome. And as we can see from the simple slopes analyses, healthcare professionals with high self-efficacy showed a stronger positive relationship between insider mistreatment frequency and effective well-being. So in this case, we found the opposite instead of a buffering effect. Okay, there are possible reasons behind these unexpected findings, and it could be the case that having rigid and high levels of self-efficacy can result in feelings of helplessness when trying to take control of a situation and being confident in one's ability to manage it, especially when faced with unexpected or uncontrollable events. It is also possible that highly efficacious employees who perceive work challenges as malleable invested more effort in managing and controlling workplace demands. However, for an uncontrollable demand like mistreatment, they may have perceived the interaction as a result of their incompetency or lack of work effort. I just want to highlight that this study was recently accepted for publication in the Journal of Advanced Nursing. So I have the DOI there for your reference. You can download the article through the website there. I'll ask Sean later on to share the link to the DOI link. So the second study was conducted of my PhD was conducted in the education setting. So we had 205 primary, secondary, and special education teachers in Ireland as our participants. This time we distributed 2 surveys separated by 2 weeks intervals. So trait resilience, self-efficacy, and the 2 sources of incivility were measured at time 1, and then burnout was evaluated at time 2. Now, our findings show that this time around, both sources of incivility predicted burnout, but insider sources had a stronger impact on burnout compared to outsider sources. We also found a significant interaction, this time between resilience and insider incivility in predicting burnout, again, in an unexpected outcome, similar to study 1. And as the simple slopes analysis shows here, the positive relationship between insider incivility and burnout was stronger for teachers with high levels of resilience. However, unlike the simple slopes of the first study, there's a small difference between the low levels and high levels of resilience. So my PhD research integrated both sources of mistreatment, and I found that experiencing incivility from coworkers had a stronger impact on employee well-being. Now, considering that employees work closely with their colleagues and the policies that expect employees to behave professionally at work, it makes sense that mistreatment or uncivil behavior from these sources will have a greater impact on their well-being. In addition, interpersonal relations among employees tend to be less transient and necessitate more frequent interactions than those among organizational outsiders like customers or clients. Therefore, mistreatment from a colleague might evoke feelings of injustice, negative affect, or negative emotions because it violates the norms of professionalism and respect at work. In addition to that, mistreatment or uncivil interaction from an organizational outsider, especially in these sectors, may be considered part of their job. And that's why the effect of incivility from outsiders in study 2 and the insignificant result from study 1, that's why those are the reasons why we found those effects, because maybe participants in these 2 studies, they found that mistreatment from this group of people is part of their job, is part of their role. Now, can these mild behaviors escalate to intense forms of mistreatment? Yes, it can. And Anderson and Pearson coined the term incivility spiral. Now, Anderson and Pearson use the term incivility spiral, which explains how mild discourteous behaviors can escalate into coercive and threatening behaviors. So it starts when an employee or group of employees, like Party A, performs uncivil behavior toward another person or group of employees, Party B. Now, when someone behaves impolitely towards another person, the recipient may see it as an unfair treatment and feel negative emotions. And this may cause them to want to react in a similar manner. And Patricia mentioned this earlier. However, the desire to respond is not necessarily a desire to harm the other person physically or emotionally. So it may simply be a way of showing the negative emotions that the recipient is experiencing. Okay, so the spiral continues when Party B responds with an uncivil act, which is perceived by Party A. Party A then attributes the incivility to Party B and experiences a similar cognitive and emotional response. Similarly, the display of an impolite demeanor might lead Party A to respond in the same manner. Now, in situations where two parties, A and B, are involved in an uncivil interaction, either of them could choose to depart instead of continuing with the exchanges of unpleasant behavior. Anderson and Pearson use a term departure point to describe the point where uncivil behavior may be ignored by one of the parties at any time. And this happens when one party perceives interactional injustice but decides or chooses not to respond in a similar manner, thereby releasing the negative emotional energy without reciprocating to the other party. Now, in such scenarios, either party may decide to end the incivility spiral by ignoring the other party, giving them the benefit of the doubt, or considering them unworthy of further attention. Alternatively, one party may apologize, deny any intent to harm, or offer an excuse as to why they were uncivil, an excuse for their uncivil conduct, which can prompt the other party to forgive. Now, these exchanges of uncivil behaviors can reach a tipping point where uncivil acts escalate to coercive action. So Anderson and Pearson suggested that when one or more parties in these exchanges perceive that their identity is being challenged or threatened, and it triggers a tipping point leading to a stronger behavioral reaction from the threatened party. So to continue the scenario here, party A may engage in an uncivil act that could potentially constitute the initial stage of an aggressive attack. However, it is uncertain if this act is deliberate or not. Nevertheless, Party B regards this action as coercive, and this cognitive interpretation may cause Party B to experience a loss of face, which might subsequently result in a state of anger. The combination of loss of face and anger might incite a desire for revenge, which may exceed the magnitude of the uncivil act initially conducted or perpetrated by Party A. Consequently, Party B may retaliate with a forceful action of their own, triggering comparable cognitive, emotional, and behavioral responses from Party A. Now, Party B may feel justified in taking even more forceful action, leading to a continuous spiral of escalation. And this is where the stage where a mild discourteous behavior can lead into a more aggressive or coercive acts in the workplace. Now, based on years of research, we can say that incivility, like bullying, as mentioned by Kira earlier, is a social stressor in the workplace. So how can we tackle these behaviors at work? Okay, so the management has a critical role to play here. In this case, the management should distinguish what is considered acceptable and what is not acceptable behaviors at work. Now, critical incidents can be a way to create a taxonomy of unacceptable behaviors, and practitioners and scholars like me can draw strategies from these and help management implement policies that highlight respect and professionalism at work. Another way to diffuse or curtail workplace incivility is through simulation training. So Waters et al. Back in 2015 conducted interpersonal professional communication training among healthcare workers, and they use computer-generated scenarios to train healthcare workers on how to deal uncivil behaviors at work and kind of like delineate what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behaviors at work. Now, what they found is that the simulation improved the perceived abilities related to communication and teamwork amongst those healthcare workers who participated in this study. The other thing is that workplace civility workshops and cultural change initiatives like the civility and engagement in the workplace programs, commonly known as CREW, could be helpful tools to promote respectful behaviors amongst team members. And I believe CREW was conducted back in the States in 2009. This is where organizations contact the organization, the CREW, who facilitates a CREW, and they invite people to investigate the uncivil climate in the organizations, and they design training. It usually takes a year, where they go step by step in kind of like promoting respect in the workplace. So they have different activities depending on the culture that they perceive or they investigate in the work. Now, to conclude, work is a social activity. Now, due to the increasing interdependence of task and employees in today's competitive work environment, organizations depend on positive employee relations to increase effectiveness and productivity. And we often hear the term respect begets respect. However, despite the awareness raised in scholarly work, social issues like incivility, bullying remain prevalent and constitute a significant proportion of workplace demands. So we are humans, as mentioned by Kira earlier, but I suppose we should be mindful. We should be conscious of our behaviors and the emotions that we show to others. Additionally, the management plays a critical role in reducing workplace incivility by, I suppose, fostering a culture of respect and professionalism. And this can be accomplished through implementation of the policies, through education of staff, and evidence-based interventions. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm handing the floor back to Patricia, and I hope you learned something new from that presentation.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Certainly very interesting and food for thought in so many ways. And one of the things I think is interesting on your presentation is that the fact that resilience is almost counterintuitive. And so if people are giving lots of training on issues like resilience, they have to be careful, because sometimes the more resilient you are, the more affected you are by this mistreatment, because your expectation is that you can handle everything. And therefore, when you cannot handle something like this, you feel extra hurt by it. So it's very good for employers to do what sometimes employers like to just put money into something that looks like it'll be a solution, but it's just box ticking, and it's also wasteful. And even with the best will in the world, that's not the ideal. What escalates conflict? Bullying. Now, these are a list of things, and you might just think to yourselves, what escalates it? Because conflict is going to be there anyway. Something happens to escalate it to bullying. Usually it's a myriad of things, but it's in the environment, it's in the workplace environment, and it's usually some amalgam of things. So not just one thing. Support systems are hugely important for employees and for dealing with conflict early. Are there active support systems? Is there good teamwork or collegiality? Is there proper training, not just about bullying, but to do your job properly? Because when people are not trained, they feel vulnerable and they behave differently. And when other people see that someone is not trained and behaving differently, they might take advantage of that. And they might take advantage of it because they feel that job is easy to do and the person's not doing it, but the person might not have been trained. So little things are important. Time pressures and asking people to make decisions very quickly are known stressors. And also repeated prolonged exposure to overwork can result in a culture whereby no one's looking at how people behave with each other. And if we're all honest, when we're in a hurry, when we're rushing, when we have a lot of demands on us, we don't have the resources to behave as well to people as we otherwise would. But what we think is, in our attribution, in our flawed, skewed, biased attribution, well, it's okay for me to be like this and to be snappy and short and a bit mean because I'm in a hurry. But everybody else doesn't know you're in a hurry. So that's a problem. And that's about communication, but it's also about being overworked. Also, there's difficult personal circumstances brought to work, which everybody does. You cannot park them at the door. It plays a part. I have heard many times people saying, I know I didn't say at the time, but actually looking back, I had this issue or that issue, and this person triggered me because they reminded me of my father-in-law who I didn't get on with, or somebody else. So there's loads of personal things. We cannot divorce our personal psychology from our workplace behavior and from the technical legal aspect of workplace dynamics within which the world of conflict and bullying resides. We try, but we cannot. So let's try something else. Sometimes lack of management, fairness, and transparency can escalate things because the management maybe feels one person is better, or they prefer them, or they don't apply the transparent model they should do of the anti-bullying policy. And if the manager is too involved, they should not be managing that particular complaint. Some other manager should take it over. The employer is responsible. And at the end of the day, judges or coroners or whoever will ask the employer representative. And I've been there many times when they've been asked, what did you do? Why did you do that? And why did you not do this? And it's very difficult seeing good people not knowing what to say when they should have done, I should have passed it over to someone else. I didn't like dealing with it because I'm afraid of emotion, Your Honour. Didn't want to see the tear. Hence, we were here in the court looking for massive, I mean, a huge amount of money being spent. You should have passed it over if you didn't like seeing emotion. And the employer should have made sure you did, because there might be a tear when it comes to someone complaining about feeling disrespected and undermined and humiliated. Lack of role clarity is an issue, and nobody taking responsibility when things go wrong. These are just things that escalate conflict and bullying. They're not the cause, but they escalate it. So just to think about that. Oops, sorry. Solutions revisited. So what are the solutions? Everyone sees things differently, and we perceive things differently, and we bring biases. You need to listen and learn. These are very emotional events, and the emotionality is very hard to find. So you do need to find what happened. When did it happen? Where did it happen? How did it happen, as in how did it unfold? And the last question is why. So sometimes if you do the others, you eventually find the why. We don't go straight to the why, because emotionality is around the event. Psychological safety. Is there psychological safety and trust in the workplace, the team, and the unit? Because if there is, these things usually won't escalate. Psychological safety is a construct that says, I feel safe to fail at work. I feel safe to not do the best thing ever. I feel safe around the people around me. And we're doing, the Health and Safety Authority are having another one of these seminars in April on the 23rd. It's bookable online, register for free, on psychological safety with a colleague from ESB. Situation dynamics also matter in terms of bullying. What are the pressures of the context? Situational dynamics cannot be underestimated. In one situation, something can escalate, another it won't. Is the environment cooperative? Is there good leadership? Also the triggers. No matter how much you're motivated, we also have cues. So the Shakespearean term, the motive and the cue. What's the motive? Is it good? But what's the cue? Is it bad? And are there systems in place under the workplace systems? So the environment influences us all. Think about the restaurant. Often the engagement type trumps the food. Think about driving. Science just nudges us to remember, and it says, is anyone looking? Easy wins, food near the checkout. I don't know if you know the nappies and beer studies, but it was a study done in the UK on Friday nights where they were finding more beer being bought with nappies, and it was that the dads were babysitting or were minding their children, so they put the beer beside the nappies and sales went up. So you can put things near each other for people to do the better behavior as a nudge. Again, smoking, looking at smoking and trying to reduce smoking in Australia study done, keep doing study of awareness. That they did another thing which said just when do people have their cravings? Usually it's late at night, usually it's first thing in the morning. So we'll have some apps on the phone, then they can do something else, like look at lovely pictures, imagine holidays, or do something else that's pleasurable at the moment when they're craving through an app. So pro-social behavior is very influenced by what do other people do and think? What do my group do and think? Antisocial behavior is where is the line and what alternatives are there? So you need to make sure in your organization there's a line, and that if there's an alternative, which is if you feel you've got an annoyance with someone, you can go and speak to someone else. So you understand these to extinguish bad behavior and promote good behavior. So thanks for coming, and all the best to you all, and have a happy and safe and healthy Easter. Thank you.